Beowulf attacks Grendel's mother. Historical background. Beowulf, written sometime between the 8th and 11th centuries, is written in Anglo-Saxon, the language spoken in Britain before the Norman conquest in 1066. That is, before the extensive influence of French on the language we speak today. Still, Beowulf has come to be recognized as the foundational epic of English and British culture, because the early Anglo-Saxons were the descendants of Germanic and Scandinavian tribes that invaded Britain beginning in the 5th century. As a result, there was a lot of shared cultural background between the Anglo-Saxons and Scandinavians, and the Anglo-Saxons looked back to their relatives across the sea when they wanted to tell stories about their own past. So Beowulf isn't just a story told in one place, Britain, about another place, Scandinavia. It's also told in one time about an earlier time. We know this because the culture in which the poem was recited, 8th to 11th century Britain, had already been Christianized, but the Scandinavian culture that the poem describes is still pagan. The poem is a way for the Anglo-Saxons to describe their own past, their ancestors who came from over the sea centuries before. Beowulf. After these words, the Prince of the Weatheryates was impatient to be away and plunged suddenly. Without more ado, he dived into the heaving depths of the lake. It was the best part of a day, before he could see the solid bottom. Quickly, the one who haunted those waters, who had scavenged and gone her gluttonous rounds for 100 seasons, sensed a human observing her outlandish lair from above. So she lunged and clutched and managed to catch him in her brutal grip, but his body, for all that, remained unscathed. The mesh of the chainmail saved him on the outside. Her savage talons failed to rip the web of his war shirt. Then once she touched bottom, the wolfish swimmer carried the ring-mailed prince to her court, so that for all his courage he could never use the weapons he carried, and a bewildering horde came at him from the depths, drove of sea beasts who attacked with tusk and tore at his chainmail in a ghastly onslaught. The gallant man could see he had entered some hellish turnhole, and yet the water did not work against him, because the hull roofing held off the force of the current. Then he saw firelight, a gleam and flare up, a glimmer of brightness. The hero observed that the swamp thing from hell, the Tarn hag in all her terrible strength, then heaved his war sword and swung his arm. The decorated blade came down ringing and singing on her head. But he soon found his battle torch extinguished. The shining blade refused to bite. It spared her and failed the man in his need. It had gone through many hand-to-hand fights, had hewed the armor and helmets of the doomed, but here at last the fabulous powers of that heirloom failed. Higelac's kinsman kept thinking about his name and fame. He never lost heart. Then, in fury, he flung his sword away. The keen, inlaid, worm-looped patterned steel was hurled to the ground. He would have to rely on the might of his arm. So must a man do who intends to gain enduring glory in a combat. Life doesn't cost him thought. Then the Prince of Waryates, warming to his fight with Grendel's mother, gripped her shoulder and laid about him in a battle frenzy. He pitched his killer opponent to the floor, but she rose quickly and retaliated, grappled him tightly with her grim embrace. The sure-footed fight fell daunted. The strongest of warriors stumbled and fell. So she pounced upon him and pulled out a broad, whetted knife, so she could avenge her only child. But the mesh of chainmail on Beowulf's shoulder shielded his life, turned the edge and tip of the blade. The son of Ecgtheow would surely have perished, and the Yates lost their warrior under the wide earth, had the strong links and locks of his war gear not helped to save him. Holy God decided the victory. It was easy for the Lord, the ruler of heaven, to redress the balance once Beowulf got back up on his feet. Then he saw a blade that boded well, a sword in her armory, an ancient heirloom from the days of the giants, an ideal weapon, one that any warrior would envy, but so huge and heavy in itself, only Beowulf could wield it in battle. So the shielding's hero, hard-pressed and enraged, took a firm hold of the hilt and swung the blade in an arc, a resolute blow that bit into her neck-bone and severed it entirely, toppling the doomed house of her flesh. She fell to the floor. The sword dripped blood. The swordsman was elated. A light appeared, and the place brightened the way the sky does when heaven's candle is shining clearly. He inspected the vault, with sword held high, its hilt raised. To guard and threaten, Higelac's thane scouted by the wall in Grendel's wake. Now the weapon was to prove its worth. the warrior determined to take revenge for every gross act Grendel had committed, and not only for that one occasion when he'd come to slaughter the sleeping troops. 15 of Hrothgar's house guards surprised on their benches and ruthlessly devoured, and as many again carried away, a brutal plunderer. Beowulf in his fury now settled that score. He saw the monster in his resting place, war-weary and wrecked, a lifeless corpse, a casualty of the battle in Heorot. The body gaped at the stroke dealt to it after death. Beowulf cut the corpse's head off. Immediately the counselors, keeping a lookout with Hrothgar, watching the lake water, saw a heave up and surge of waves, and blood in the backwash. They bowed gray heads, spoke in their sage, experienced way about the good warrior, how they never again expected to see that prince returning in triumph to their king. It was clear to many that the wolf of the deep had destroyed him forever. The 9th hour of the day arrived. The brave Shieldings abandoned their cliff top, and the king went home, but sick at heart, staring at the mirror the strangers held on. They wished, without hope, to behold their lord, Beowulf himself. Meanwhile, the sword began to wilt into glory icicles, to slather and thaw. It was a wonderful thing, the way it all melted as ice melts, when the Father eases the fetters off the frost and unravels the water ropes. He who wields power over time and tide, he is the true Lord. The Yate captain saw treasure in abundance, but carried no spoils from those quarters, except for the head and the inlaid hilt embossed with jewels. Its blade had melted, and the scrollwork on it burnt, so scalding was the blood of the poisonous fiend who had perished there. Then away he swam, the one who had survived the fall of his enemies, flailing to the surface. The wide water, the waves and pools were no longer infested once the wandering fiend let go of her life and this unreliable world. The seafarer's leader made for land, resolutely swimming, delighted with his prize, the mighty load he was lugging to the surface. His thanes advanced in a troop to meet him, thanking God and taking great delight in seeking their prince back safe and sound. Quickly the hero's helmet and mail shirt were loosed and unlaced. The lake settled, clouds darkened above the bloodshot depths. With high hearts they headed away along footpath and trails through the fields, roads that they knew, each of them wrestling with the head they were carrying from the lakeside cliff. Men kingly in their courage and capable of difficult work. It was a task for 4 to hoist Grendel's head on his spear and bear it under strain to the bright hall. But soon enough they neared the place, 14 Yates in fine fettle, striding across the outlying ground in a delighted throng around their leader. In he came, the Thane's commander, the arch-warrior, to address Hrothgar. His courage was proven, his glory was secure. Grendel's head was hauled by the hair, dragged across the floor where people were drinking, a horror for both queen and company to behold. They stared in awe. It was an astonishing sight. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. So, son of Halfdane, prince of Shieldings, we are glad to bring this booty from the lake. It is a token of triumph, and we tender it to you. I barely survived the battle under water. It was hard fought, a desperate affair that could have gone badly if God had not helped me. The outcome would have been quick and fatal. Although runting is hard-edged, it could never bring it to bear in battle, but the Lord of men allowed me to behold, for he often helps the unbefriended, an ancient sword shining on the wall, a weapon made for giants, there for the wielding. Then my moment came in the combat, and I struck the dwellers in that den. Next thing, the Damascened sword blade melted, it bloated, and it burned in their rushing blood. I have wrested the hilt from the enemy's hand, avenged the evil done to the Danes. It is what was due. And this I pledge, O Prince of the Shieldings, you can sleep secure with your company of troops in Heorot Hall. Never need you fear for a single thane of your set or nation, young warriors or old, that laying waste of life that you and your people endured of yore. Then the gold hilt was handed over to the old lord, a relic from long ago. For the venerable ruler, that rare smith work was passed on to the prince of the Danes when those devils perished. Once death removed that murdering, guilt-steeped, God-cursed fiend, eliminating his unholy life, and his mother's as well. It was willed that the king, who of all the lavish gift lords of the north was the best regarded between the two seas, Hrothgar spoke. He examined the hilt, the relic of old times. It was engraved all over and showed how war first came into the world and the flood destroyed the tribe of giants. They suffered a terrible severance from the Lord. The Almighty made the waters rise, drowned them in the deluge for retribution. In pure gold inlay on the sword guards, there were rune markings correctly incised, stating and recording for whom the sword had been first made and ornamented. With its scrollwork hilt. Then everyone hushed as the son of Halfdane spoke his wisdom. A protector of his people, pledged to uphold truth and justice and to respect tradition, is entitled to affirm that this man was born to distinction. Beowulf, my friend, your fame has gone far and wide. You are known everywhere. In all things you are even-tempered, prudent, and resolute. So I stand firm by the promise of friendship we exchanged before. Forever you will be your people's mainstay and your own warrior's helping hand. Heremod was different. The way he behaved to Ekwalla's sons, his rise in the world brought little joy to the Danish people, only death and destruction. He vented his rage on people he caroused with, killed his own comrades, a pariah king who cut himself off from his own kind, even though God Almighty had made him eminent and powerful and marked him from the start for a happy life. But a change happened. He grew bloodthirsty, gave no more rings to honor the Danes. He suffered in the end for having plagued his people for so long. His life lost happiness. So learn from this and understand true values. I who tell you have wintered into wisdom.